speaker, the status quo is characterized by a huge amount of skepticism towards AI technology in general, in which we are oftentimes willing to believe AI technology is oftentimes dangerous, that it can significantly harm the human population. The truth is that, especially when we have an infrastructure, or when we're assuming the case in which AI technology is significantly better than human labor in terms of bringing about benefits to society, we think that the implementation of AI technology is indeed beneficial for human beings in general, and human society in general. If that's the case, we think that it's important to get rid of skepticism in general, or at least alleviate the skepticism that exists in order to maintain the development of AI technology as much as possible. For that reason, we're very proud to propose. What is the model under our side? We're going to conceal all cases in which there are malfunctionings of AI surgeons or AI doctors in this case. We want to conceal the situation in which there are casualties that occur. We're willing to give compensations in these cases in terms of monetary formats or other formats in general. Whatever is required, we're going to conceal this issue. We're willing to provide further payouts to these individuals in order to keep them, lock them up. We're willing to do that as long as you can
clarification.
Yes.
Given that this is going to be a massive part of direct review in a talk path, could you perhaps explain to us detailedly why exactly you think it's possible to conceal all information, if not most information, because surely that's a controversial premise?
Here's the thing. We think obviously this number one should be the fiat in this way. We're assuming that this is possible. Yeah. But secondly, we think obviously even if we can, we're going to try to our maximum benefit to our maximum ability. So we think that concealment of it's on the comparative, it's better to have at least the one case less revealed in comparison, right? So I think on the comparative, we're still going to defend that. With that being said, two main things in this speech. Firstly, why this is by principle justified in terms of government concealing these cases. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why this is essential to furthering progress in the AI technology and in society in general. Firstly, why is this principally justified? The first thing I want to talk about is why the right to know is not an absolute thing, right? Because we don't necessarily think that there necessarily exists an absolute inherent right to know something. Because we don't think that everyone has a right to exist. Everyone who exists has a right to know everything that goes around the world to begin with, right? For example, we think that in terms of private issues, people don't necessarily have the access to nitty-gritty details of everyone's life, right? We think that this isn't necessarily a private issue, so thanks. Insofar as we're talking about one individual receiving specific harm from one specific malfunctioning, we don't necessarily think that this is necessarily a public issue to begin with. This is more in the private realm of individuals' lives. We don't necessarily see the purpose in saying that there's an individual right to know everything that's going on specifically in these private issues. No thanks. But secondly, we think that these are issues, when we talk about issues that are covered by right to know, we think that these are issues that directly involve individuals or directly affect individuals or directly require the individual's contribution inside these issues. For example, we're okay with saying that the individuals have a right to know what politicians are doing, because presumably they have some degree of impact from that. But furthermore, because they have to contribute to that issue, because they're directly direct stakeholders that are voting upon that issue, they need to know what's going on in order for them to properly contribute to society. In this case, we don't necessarily think that individuals are able to contribute specifically to these issues, right? Just because there's one malfunctioning of an AI surgeon doesn't mean that you as an individual can do much about that, which is the reason why you having the right to know, knowing this information isn't necessarily going to benefit society much in general, right? It isn't going to benefit yourself either. That's the reason why we don't necessarily think that there's a crucial need for a right to know in this specific case. We do not think that the right to know is absolute in this scenario. But secondly, we think there's a government duty to ensure a stable society, and we think concealing information is fine within that purpose, right? So for example, we think that in cases of epidemics, obviously when you have an epidemic that's starting, people start spreading rumors, there's outspread panic in the society. We think that the government has a responsibility to stop that, and is oftentimes going to conceal information about epidemics in these situations. We think that similarly, in this case, in situations where you already have a huge skepticism towards AI, the existence of one case in which there is a specific harm, then there's an extremely huge likelihood of instability happening in society and huge chaos breaking about. We think that this is because people are likely to panic. Because two reasons. Firstly, because as I told you, there's already an outspread skepticism against AI. I'll take it in a moment. Skepticism against AI technology in general, which is why people are likely to panic the moment when they see one piece of malfunctioning. But secondly, because unlike human doctors, there isn't much of an individual difference between these different machines. That's why if you have the idea that one machine malfunctions, the other machine is also likely to malfunction as well, which is likely the scenario that's going to happen. People are likely to panic as a result of that. Yes?
If skepticism is the problem, isn't it going to be worse off on your side if you try to shut up people by giving money?
Yeah.
I think it's worse off in a situation where people have the idea that their skepticism is confirmed. I think that that's the more likely scenario in which people have that skepticism further, but feel that their skepticism is confirmed and have more reason to oppose this technology. But secondly, if you assume a world in which this AI is widely implemented as a result of this, you need to understand that this absolute chaos is particularly harmful, right? Because when individuals feel that the, like AI surgeons cannot be trusted, but they don't necessarily have much other alternatives because this is widespread. There is a huge lack of access to crucial medical services that individuals have the need to access, right? Because this is also critically damaging to human society, to human individuals in general. That's the reason why government has the duty to ensure that this information is not leaked to ensure the stability of that society. With that being said, second argument, how is this essential to furthering progress? I already explained to you how people are likely to react, because people being likely to panic at the understanding that there is a malfunctioning AI and that their AI is also likely to malfunction as well. Why is this harmful? Firstly, we think that people are less likely to be going to be less more reluctant to the usage of this AI. Because we think that on the comparative, you need to understand that the spread of this AI is largely a beneficial thing insofar as we assume that this is better than human surgeons to begin with. Insofar as we're going on the comparative when you have a world in which you use human surgeons, there's a lot more likely for mistakes or accidents to be happening on that world, because that's the assumption of this debate. That's why we think in general, for the large population in general, it's going to lead to a lot more lives saved under our system. You have AI surgeons widespread. You only have this when you don't have the skepticism, you don't have the widespread conception that this is a dangerous thing to begin with. That only occurs under our side. But secondly, and more importantly, we think that when it comes to development in other areas, to make breakthroughs in AI, other AI technologies, you need to have widespread support for the development of AI technology and for the continued investment in this form of technology. We think that is stopped at the point at which you have the conception that this is something dangerous. If this is dangerous in one realm, it's also likely dangerous in other realms. When that's the conception that exists, you stop progress from happening in other realms as well. We think that's also significantly harmful in those developments, because it's likely that human lives are going better with those developments as well. But thirdly, why does this still lead to more development in this technology? Because the idea that might come from the opposition is that when you don't have this narrative that this is harmful, there's less likelihood of development breakthroughs to make this safer. Now that's still like thesis on our side. Because firstly, competition is likely to still exist, right? Insofar as there are different corporations that are producing this, there's still a likeliness that people are willing to innovate more to break the less likelihood of these malfunctions happening in order to win in the competition. But secondly, insofar as it's more widespread as a result of this, there's going to be a larger demand for this, which increases that incentive further. That's why we think the development is still going to happen. For all these reasons, we're proposed.
I thank Prime Minister. Now welcome Leader of Opposition.
As a student majoring in medicine, I'm relatively sure that they've established nothing about what medicine should look like. Because patients, ladies and gentlemen, are not cattle. They're not tools for social changes, for a better environment, for artificial intelligence. They are patients who are dying on the ground. If surgery fails, they will die on the ground. We think this motion is simply unacceptable. Very happy to stand on the opposition. 3 issues from Leader of the Opposition. First of all, how it is principally unjustified to get away with the responsibility and compensation. Secondly, about why it hinders the ability to improve that artificial intelligence with and lastly, how it hinders autonomy and informed decision and choice of those patients, which we think is center of what medicine is about. Before the engagement, first of all, about the model. They say they'll pay money for victims who for those victims of this mistake, right? We don't really understand what they are doing. If they want to conceal that information, they were better not to tell it at all, ladies and gentlemen, because the point you receive money, you will exactly know that and assume that it was a mistake, right? Because other people might not getting it, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we don't really understand that model, they better conceal it in the first place. And secondly, about skepticism. First of all, even if they reveal all cases of mistake by AI, they can still statistically prove that this is far better than human beings, ladies and gentlemen. That enough persuades people to believe that AI robots are better at surgeries. We don't think that is happening under their side. And also, skepticism becomes worse under their side if they try to conceal it and get it found out, right? Because that skepticism now, under their side, won't just go to AI, but also government, who are implementing AI development schemes, for instance. They will lose political capital. They will lose traction to that designing, for example, campaigns or like those strategies, right? We think that skepticism could much worse under their side if they're concerned about it. So moving on to the first issue about how it's principally unjustified to get away with the responsibility. Accusing accidents, ladies and gentlemen, is not just about blaming doctors. It's about compensating for victims who deserve that compensation. No thanks. And we think the problem is their side, is the disrespect, the sacrifice on the ground, right? Because family who trusted the AI, patients who trusted the AI, who were killed and because of this accident, crying on the ground, were smashed, but trying to accuse that incident, but can't do that because, because they're deceived by the government policy that conceals disinformation, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, just because artificial intelligence is, no thank you, slightly superior to human beings, doesn't mean we can't accuse them and deliver justice and compensation for individual victims who deserve it, ladies and gentlemen. If that principle about being superior can be the justification to get out with responsibility is correct, judges who know less about medicine compared to doctors can't try doctors and can't accuse those doctors in court, ladies and gentlemen. That is the principle of medicine, principle of compensation. We think victims' feelings should not be dismissed, ladies and gentlemen. Yes?
Here's the thing, we're okay with compensation. You need to prove why it needs to be revealed in order for compensation to happen.
That's our second argument. Why it hinders the ability to improve the artificial intelligence. They misunderstand it, right? Because humans are still the ones who write the code that codes AI and artificial intelligence. It's not that AI is self-cleansing everything. It's initially controlled and programmed by human beings. They lose the momentum to improve the situation. Because just because it is better than any people doesn't mean it's got no room to improve further, right? They need to literally decrease the number of further accidents happening in the future. How do they lose that momentum? First of all, because they don't know anything about that incident in the first place, right? Because if people believe that artificial intelligence is literally perfect, there will be no momentum whatsoever to pressurize engineers, for instance, to improve that situation. Also, you have to recognize already there's high expectation on artificial intelligence. AI is performing very well in many other fields, for instance. That's why, without this viscerality of medical accidents in which innocent people, elderly, children are killed on the ground during surgery, they can't possibly have that momentum to push government or push engineers to improve that situation about artificial intelligence. What are the consequences of this, ladies and gentlemen? Literally, in the name of artificial intelligence being superior to human being, they kill a lot more because they lose the momentum to improve the artificial intelligence that otherwise could have done on our side of the house if they know the information about people, artificial intelligence actually committing medical accidents. So lastly, about what kind of autonomy we should regard to those patients, what kind of informed decision we should support. Right? So here's the thing. Medicine is not just about curing illness. It's about allowing people to choose what kind of life they want, what kind of treatment they want, how they want to define their own life, considering that illness and considering symptoms. That individual choice to take a treatment, the choice is quite subjective, and also that choice is quite impactful and entirely changes your life as an individual patient. Why the important thing here is someone is already allowed to opt out of that medical treatment sometimes for any reason, because people should have full information to choose how they define their own lives. Some people say, if there is a risk, we won't take that surgery. We would rather go to hospice using anti-cancer drugs and painkillers, for instance. That life fits me, right? They literally deprived people of the chance to define that and what kind of medical treatment they want. Because medicine, again, is really multifaceted. It's not just about curing illness. Like having grievances listened, getting confidence, right? About trusting doctors' personality. All of those things are associated with illnesses and medicine. That's why some people refuse surgery in front of one doctor and don't in another doctor. The choice of humanity and artificial intelligence will be distorted if we don't tell individuals what kind of risk is associated with the existence of medical AI robots, right? We think we should stand for medical principle. It's not just about broad artificial intelligence debate. Happy to oppose.
Alright, I thank the Leader of Opposition. Now invite Deputy Prime Minister.
In my speech, I'm going to prove to you two things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how public uproar could bring more harm than good in society. And second of all, I'm going to talk about how the necessity of improving this technology is very important, and that could only happen under our side, where public information is disclosed when it comes to the failures of this kind of technology, which has proven to be very effective in the future. But before I move on to my argument, a few points of rebuttal to the previous speaker. Firstly, he gives us an idea about how patients are not cattle, and that people trusted AI, but if it fails, then they were tricked into it. Firstly, we think that this kind of problem exists under their side, because currently in society, we see that doctors make even more mistakes with that AI, right? That is why when they say that people trusted the AI and they were tricked into a false treatment, we think that that problem also exists under their side, where doctors are not fully efficient. But at the end of the day, what we're saying is that the government side is better off simply because we are trying to improve a technology that is proven to be very effective, right? That is why patients are better off still under our side, simply because they will be given a kind of technology that could cure them more efficiently than any humans could. But secondly, about their idea, about how they said that you can still persuade people with statistics. We think that this only happens in a world where everybody is so rational and they don't let sentiments get in the way. Like for example, even in the case of Brexit, because populist ideals were more popular than the facts of what would happen before and after a Brexit, people were so quick to judging that they would want to vote for it, right? As you can see in this case, people are not rational all the time. That's why for us to make sure that we want to develop this technology to its utmost form, we want to disclose certain information to make sure that nothing gets in the way, especially when sometimes public sentiments are not always rational. But thirdly, about their idea about how we hinder the ability to develop AI because you lose the momentum, and of course corporations won't be incentivized to make good technology, right? We think that there are natural check and balance systems that exist. Like for example, what Wonmin already talked to you about, we have competition between corporations to make sure that their technology is even better. However, if it comes to the case that it's so bad, we think that government can always step in to intervene and to make sure that unproductive and horrible producers of this technology should be eliminated from the market. But further on, we think that improvement cannot even happen under their side, where public uproar is something that hinders development, right? And this is something that I'm going to talk about in my argumentation. But lastly, about the idea about how people have a right to choose how they are treated. We think that even under our side, this right to choice still exists, because people can choose whether or not they want to undertake this kind of treatment. And if they're so skeptical, they don't have to, right? But before I move on to my argumentation, yes?
So, why is that skepticism so big to the extent that people refuse going to medical robots?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about that in my argumentation, about how public uproar brings a lot of harms, and I'm going to talk to you about real-life examples about why this happens. In our society, in our status quo, we see that necessary and hopeful technologies have always been hindered because of public uproar. For example, in the case of auto-driving thing, because which is proven to increase road safety because it omits human errors, or even gene editing, which has proven to heal gene-related diseases, or even nuclear energy, which would bring even better, cheaper, and sustainable electricity, right? What all these cases have in common is that negative public sentiments have hindered crucial investments on making sure that these technologies have developed to the very full extent. And we can't blame humans for it because it's very natural for people to tend to be doubtful about things that they are not familiar of. That's why we're saying that there's a big harm in the whole idea of sensationalism. When there's a wide uproar of public sentiments which are based on emotions, which affects investments on these kind of technology. That's why when side opposition side blames us for saying that we lose momentum and technology won't develop, we think that this is much more worse off on their side, where investment all in and of itself is hindered, right? For example, in the case of nuclear power plant facilities in South Korea, it was altogether stopped because the people were so scared of all this past incidents like Chernobyl and whatnot, when all these kinds of errors were caused by human errors. Or even about the case of when there was accident with the auto-driving car, when even though the whole accident was because of a human error, people blamed the whole auto-driving cars and made sure that they wanted to boycott this thing. As you can see in these kinds of scenarios, because people are so skeptic about different kinds of new technologies, crucial investments to make sure that these kind of technologies are fully utilized and fully developed to its maximum has been hindered, and which is why we think that this is very harmful. But before I move on, sure.
Are you trying to say that government should limit information on all sorts of scientific innovations and advancements in order to ensure that they can be fully funded?
Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, that's why we think that because the technology that we're trying to defend from side government is proven to omit human error in the whole medical world, we think that there's big value in this because, for example, in contexts like developing countries or isolated areas where they have lack of resources or lack of access to good doctors and human medical resources, these kinds of AI and the development of this AI is very important for people to actually get the treatment that they need. Because not everyone and not all parts of the world have good access to these kind of good doctors and whatnot, right? That is why at the end of the day, we want efficient development of these kinds of technologies, which we believe happens only under our side, where we conceal certain information that hinders the process of development, right? Thus, even if side government may accuse us of the idea that we lose momentum and whatnot, we think that it's much better off under our side, where we actually will continue to regulate these kinds of activities to make sure that our technology is developed to the fullest. And at the same time, we think that this kind of momentum won't exist under side opposition at all, simply because the whole investment is swayed by public sentiments, which are usually based on emotions, not actual facts. That is why we think that at the end of the day, when it comes to medical research and whatnot, side opposition stands by our very get-go idea that right to information is not an absolute value. For all these reasons, we're very proud to propose.
Alright, I thank Deputy Prime Minister and I invite Deputy Leader of Opposition.
OG claim that some people are irrational and swayed by the skepticism. Therefore, we should categorically remove that chance for consent. What we have proven to you from Leader of the Opposition today is that people are going to overestimate the effectiveness of this AI and result in not being able to consent to the outcome. We say people are going to be dying anyways, but the thing here is a subjective consent or subjective fulfillment of how you are going to end your life or how you're going to treat your own body is something most important, and doctors should be prioritizing the most. It is not important to care about how this AI company are going to be developing, because we believe that it's totally unjust for the company company or the government to instrumentalize individuals and just use them for the social battering ram. We say that individuals who are going to be deceived by the government, this policy, is the victim that we need to cater the most. For all that reason, we propose this motion. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be asking 2 questions and telling you why opening opposition took over opening government. First question is that, is rational consent impossible to begin with? Because if rational consent is something that is something that we can achieve on the outside of the house, there's no reason for affirming this motion, right? Because people are going to be subscribing to the idea anyways, and we don't really see any materialistic harm. Because all of the harm that opening government talked about is the harm that people are going to refuse to go to this robot because they are going to be skeptical, right? So if we can tell you that people actively consent and actively going to be subjectively fulfilled as a result of being able to consent to that, we think we're going to take in this first class. But second, even if we were to assume the metric from opening government, which is to say objectively saving many lives is important, we're going to be further telling you that why under outside of the house we can have a better robot compared to the opening government. So all of the independent models will be integrated into these class points. So first, let me ask the question, is rational consent impossible to begin with? If we look at the details of how the opening government tried to depict this skepticism, we see it's actually insufficient, because what they have talked about is, for example, automatic, for example, driving system. But if you look at an example of advanced country like Japan, it's actually increasing, right? People are adopting to that, and people can know how, like, the statistics that the possibility of these like automated driving systems are relatively safer than human driver, for instance, right? And if we can have an actual statistics which proves it is safer, I think that skepticism that they're talking about is relatively not that problematic to begin with, right? But because if you look at the status quo, when doctors provide a new medicine, for example, and people don't really know that, but still people are going to subscribe to that new technology because they aspire for life in that instance, for example, right? And if the doctor shows accurate data, that is when people consent, and that's when people subjectively is to be satisfied and subscribe to that, right? Just because that technology is new doesn't mean everyone will go crazy and not consent and just run away, right? We think people will still choose that if we can at least prove a better accurate information. But what is the comparative? We think the comparative is far worse, right? Because under their side of the house, opening government prime minister clearly said that they're going to be paying compensation when this accident happens, and they say this compensation will be used to shut up these people, right? Why is this going to be problematic? This is because doctor will lose trust from this patient categorically, right? Because it will be the precedent that doctor are going to lie to you, the possibility that you are the risk that you're going to be having going through the surgery. Why is this going to be problematic? Because if you don't know the possibility of accident to happen or possibility of you dying because of that surgery, what does this mean? This means that people are going to overestimate the effectiveness of robot, right? Why is this going to be problematic? Because if there are absolutely no precedent of no accident in the first place, people randomly assume that it's going to be 100% okay, right? Otherwise, because it means this doctor tried to use this robot knowing that this surgery are going to fail, right? That's not likely. Therefore, we think it's the most likely scenario here is that the patient are going to categorically overestimate the effectiveness of the surgery. Here comes my leader of the opposition's consent argument becomes important. People have a right to choose how to end their life, right? When you, for example, opt into surgery, it's going to cost huge amount of money, right? And if you opt into surgery, you have a risk of losing your life immediately because of this accident, right? Why is this important? If you do know the risk of this robot failing, that is when you can choose to reject this surgery in that very beginning. No, thank you. Reject having this surgery in the first place, right? We think this is very important for 2 reasons. First, because the subjective satisfaction is something that we need to be prioritizing the most. Because if you look at the metric of why individual choice becomes important in the first place, it is because state cannot define what is objectively the best for individual. Because if the state can do that, state can deprive every single choice. But we don't do that because we understand the subjective choice of individual connects to the maximum happiness of individual. That is why we think it's important for people to be able to rationally calculate the risk risk and demerits, for example, money or the time or preparation for your death, for example. We think it's going to connect to the maximum subjective happiness of an individual. That's why states don't have a right to objectively and categorically force an individual to obtain and enforce and manufacture this consent. But on the second level, we think individuals naturally have a choice to make a choice in the first place because they have a bodily autonomy, right? Your body is your most sacred property that you were given from the very beginning, right? It is not something state gave you. It is not something, it is a privilege in the first place. your existence or life or your body is something which is prior to the existence of the society or existence to the state, right? That is why it is not okay for state to make people use people as a slave because it's instrumentalized people's life, right? Existence of the state, existence of society must not be prior to the existence of the individual's bodily autonomy. For all that reason, because we think your body belongs to yourself, you have a choice how to decide and how to end your life. For that reason, we think people can have a perfectly rational, not perfectly, but relatively better consent even in the status quo. And because we know that overestimation is something important. But more importantly, if we look at what's going to happen under the before that, yes.
Sir, the difference between all your arguments in the debate is that the motion assumes that the AI is objectively better when fully developed. What then is the exclusive benefit coming from your side?
Here comes the question of what does it mean by objectively better? It doesn't say 100%, but if you hide every single accident, it looks like it's perfect, right? Here's the problem. You overestimate the effectiveness of this robot. But more importantly, we say the moment in which people, the second question, so which can objectively save more? They talked about competition, but the premise of competition is that you can point out the failure. But if you cannot point out the failure, no distinction. Therefore, competition is not likely to happen. But second, people are not going to believe to what doctors say, right? Even if doctors sincerely tell you to use this robot because the possibility of you being cured by this robot is higher, people are not going to believe that. Because under your side of the house, you have some data, clear evidence, which says that there are some cases doctor deceives you, which does not exist under our side of the house, right? But there are a firm evidence under your side because people are going to be giving money and try to make you shut up, right? This is really problematic. If people record what doctors say, this will be a firm evidence, right? For that reason, people are not going to trust the doctor. Here's the problem, right? People are going to underestimate the effectiveness of this robot. At the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we think people have the ability to rationally calculate the effectiveness of this robot, but more importantly, because we think people have a right to choose what is subjectively better for their life. For all that reason, I'm more than happy to oppose.
I think the opening half now to start closing half of the debate. Member of Gov.
Chair, we think when we are talking about benefits or harm, especially when we are assuming certain kind of technology really happen in the hypothetical world, we think we need more characterization about what the world it look like in that hypothetical world, and later on, based on that context, and to materialize the benefits and backlashes from the both scenarios, which we think that is an across debate and will be thoroughly characterized by the closing government. But before that, one comment about the opening opposition, and rest will be included in my extension part. So we see the biggest impact or biggest backlash from the opening opposition is that people probably will not believe in what doctors say in the future because they know the doctor deceive them whatsoever. But the thing is, we see this kind of biggest backlash still hinges upon the premise that the government is not going to successfully conceal the data in which, the data in which, about the accidents or the incidents made by the AI robots. But which is firstly answered clearly by the opening government is purely fear, but sounds like closing opposition also raises a fear about how you're going to conceal. But let's just answer it. Firstly, we say if the AI really makes some mistakes, we just don't let them know. We just tell them it's a perfectly fine, a perfectly normal outcome of it, and you have already received the best medical treatment. We simply don't think the patients are not knowledgeable to know that they probably are mistreated by the AI robots. And about those data, we just treat those data as some national to categorize it into national defense system. We don't think that any random person or programmer in the world will have the ability to hack it and to get the data and to spread it in the world, which means that we simply don't see the premise of opening opposition is true. Sorry. So first, extension part, why we think there will be a downfall of human trust to AI robots in the medical field. So first, let's see what the world will look like when the AI when the AI robots exist and is proven to be better than the humans. We say probably there is a coexistence between AI robots and human doctors, which means that in that hypothetical world, humans probably can still choose at the very first place, which one should I choose, human doctors or AI robots. But why do we think there will suddenly have a downfall of human trust towards AI is like this? What we heard from the opening opposition is you can just simply provide them with the statistics. You shouldn't conceal the data because even if people know AI can make mistakes, you just show them the statistics and people will just miraculously buy into that statistics and still believing in AI. The problem of this claim are three. Number one, we think only statistics really cannot satisfy people's cannot persuade people because people are not professional who know how to run the R programming or MATLAB or how to statistical model, which means that even you show statistics, probably I cannot understand at all. But even if you show me the video, I'm clearly telling me how the difference between the AI robots and the human doctors when they are doing, for example, doing the operations in the emergency room. But still people without professional knowledge do not have the ability to distinguish the nuance between the AI's behavior and the human doctor's behavior. And those nuances also is more often than not very important to decide the life and death of human beings. Because when doing the operations, simply one micron or 1 nanometer will decide whether you are going to live or die, right? But people simply cannot understand it. But more importantly, even if you can use the statistics or video to persuade a certain group of people, we still see it's very problematic because we don't think people will have the incentive to read all the very lengthy statistics and videos to see AI is far much better than humans, but rather to be persuaded by more eye-catching and emotional propaganda by some very conservative and anti-scientific groups who are against AI. So how those group of people will going to react? We say once you leave those data to the society, you leave much chance to those anti-scientific people to use that incident and to frame it in a very emotional way, such as it's a government conspiracy to conceal much data, which is very lethal and will cause you death. We think people in this scenario are very susceptible to this very emotional and eye-catching article and propaganda and be persuaded by those group of people. And which is more important is that in this scenario, we simply don't think people will have the rationale to take the extremely long-term benefit into consideration, but rather to just be susceptible to the fear and the emotion created by those anti-scientific groups, and therefore the downfall of human trust will be materialized in this scenario. So, but why this is very important? So first, let's come to the principle. So what we heard from the opening opposition is to run the case about autonomy to define the way you die or to live. But ladies and gentlemen, is this that serious? We only conceal some incidents in which AI robots make mistakes. Why it will suddenly entirely influence people's rational decision to decide, which way should I die, which way should I live? We say they need to tell us why specifically this small piece of information is so important to influence people's influence people's decision making. But the comparative is like this. We say even in their side, we simply don't think people are going to make rational decisions, as I have already characterized to you how they will be misled or propagated by very emotional or eye-catching propaganda, which means that even in their side, people are still very probably make a decision on some emotion but not rational decision. But the very simple comparative is like this. So we think it's at least on our side when we just conceal the data, not letting anyone know that AI can make mistake. It's better on our side to at least save more people from the statistical level, right? But let's come to the last point, to the opening opposition. They say, oh, they don't have the probably if you consider the incidents, they don't have the incentive to improve the technology. But the question is, so what? Because like AI is far much better. It has already been proven better than the human doctors, which means that even if you don't improve, it's still far much better in your scenario where more and more people are likely to choose human doctor, facing a higher risk of dying on the operation table, right? So based on that, cross propose.
Alright, I thank member of government. Now I invite honorable member of opposition. Here.
Ready? I'm going to give you an analytical extension. That's the first 10-minute debate to illustrate what a world is most likely to look like in a world where there is indeed a dominant norm of these AI robots being in mass use in hospitals and whatnot. 3 things. First, giving you structural reasons why the backlash and outcry that both gov teams are talking about are likely to result in withdrawal of investment. Secondly, uniquely, and this is why O misses in analysis, why exactly the presence of cartels and other ways of spending dividends and revenue and status quo within these firms means that the only way to push them to improve accuracy is via the uncertainty of public outcry. Thirdly, why exactly you don't get compensation and closure for victims, because victims lose the only bargaining chip they have on their side. But first, let's deal with both gov teams, right? Because the responses are integrated here. A lot of the material we get from both gov is that you get panicky as people, because people can't process information, they say in CG, or in OG, they have outcries that they utilize frames and whatnot to facilitate anti-AI narratives and whatnot. I have 4 main new responses here. The first one is to note the bimodality of how people react to AI, right? If it's true that people right now are already skeptical of AI, it's an either or yes or no situation, right? It's deeply unclear to me why 1 or 2 singular incidents would increase the skepticism if indeed it is true as OG says, the entrenched dominant media narrative is already fuck over AI and ostracizes and status quo. So I think people's reactions to robots, just like the reaction to doctors and common sense medicine, is often yes or no, right? So you don't think, and we don't think there's a large subset in the middle, therefore, for this nudging to be in there or in effect in the first place. Second response. The importance of life and death decisions means that despite the limited time span people have and limited attention span, they will prioritize focusing disproportionately on these issues. This is where our analysis comes in, because everything OG says about the non-fungibility or the similarity between robots also applies to doctors, right? Because note on both sides, you still get narratives that human doctors aren't accurate. If anything, we think now you've created active profit incentives for these AI firms and whatnot to advertise selling human doctors are not reliable, they're bad or worse than AI robots. That is why the concept that you can't distinguish between AI robots also applies symmetrically to humans, and that is where the break even becomes at least AI robots are more accurate than human beings. Third response. Who is likely to control media narratives here? We think that to the extent that AI firms can sell their robots at high prices, hospitals can buy them at high prices, and there's going to be a lot of revenue there. These are the individuals that can pay for advertisements, pay for cultural norms, that normalize AI robots, right? That is why you see the big pharmaceutical companies right now paying for adverts saying, take your drugs, inject your vaccines, bring your children to clinics, because they can pay for advertisements that change people's perceptions. This is a nuance that OO, despite all the nodding, never gave you. Fourth response. Notice here, who ultimately holds the executive power? Because all of Gov's claims is contingent upon the assumption that legislative authorities or legislators determine how medical policies are decided in hospitals. This is often not the case, right? Because we think civil servants, bureaucrats, and also doctors with professional incentives are the ones calling the shot for which methods they utilize. That is also the very same reason why alternative medicine isn't an entrenched doctrine despite a large public majority or the conspiracist masses believing that it might be a solution. It's because those who make executive decisions here are not those who are legislatively influenced. We think that if you're a doctor, you're influenced by concerns of efficacy, of cutting costs and minimizing concerns. That is why you're likely to buy AI robots. The upshot here is that the demand for AI medical robots exists. It's unclear why there's any backlash here. Second extension. Why exactly is this important in terms of incentives to improve AI robots? OG says that you get more competition, that's why that's a natural incentive. O doesn't reply to that, but says, but you need information. I'm going to break this deadlock for you, because 3 reasons why fundamentally there are no incentives in the absence of public outcry for firms to improve quality of these robots. 1, because it is often costly to, on 2 levels. 1, the information cost and uncertainty involved are great, right? You have to gauge how much more research you need to make, how much more quantification do you need in order to demonstrate qualitative improvement to justify this decision. But secondly, because you simply need to pay far more human resources, scientists and whatnot, to invest into it. What is the trade-off here? If I'm a boss having these revenue, I can spend this on A, paying off my shareholders as dividends to make sure they keep investing in me, B, paying it into the wages and pockets of mid-level managers and whatnot instead of investing into R&D, and 3, simply skirmishing off to do lobbying and other things to entrench my influence. It's unlikely why, in the absence of public outcry, there's any incentive for companies to care about improving accuracy. The upshot or the underlying logic here is because there's an absence of alternative, that we live under a system called no alternatives, and that's why these companies can live off this ability to say, look, we only need to satisfy, no need to make it better. Second thing that follows from this is the idea of cartels, because firms do not compete, and this is nuance responding to OG, because competition causes A, undercutting of revenue or potential losses in profits, but B, you might lose that because innovation is randomly distributed across different firms. That means that you never know that you can always beat Apple with your window, or window can always beat Apple. That's why you have no incentive to compete. You're more likely to form an informal, illegitimate, or legitimate cartel, and this is something that governments can't break up because of the dependence upon medical robots here. Thirdly, because firms have lobbying power that preclude governments from intervening unless you're talking about excesses, or unless in the presence of excessive media push or public outcry. This is where our unique extension is not contradictory to this, but uniquely changes this. How do we change it? 1, you uniquely get massive uncertainty when the public might find out and the cost cannot and the firm cannot internalize the cost to publicity, to outcry, or to potential backlash you get on our side. But secondly, only when you can target your accusation and target your backlash, which is something, by the way, that only happens outside because you can point to each individual incident as opposed to pointing conspiracy theories, that is when firms fear that it is their robot that's being targeted and therefore wants to prove it. But thirdly, because in many cases shareholders care about stock prices and stock prices somehow collapse. CG saying, caught you there, that's why they don't invest. No. They still invest, it's just that they're more likely to bail in the short run, and that is why fundamentally firms have the incentive to make short-run changes to make back the shareholder revenue and the losses and shortfall there. That is why you get more accuracy overall. This fills in the gap in OO. Third extension, victims. OG mech'd it out quite nicely. OO kind of fell into the trap, but I want to call out the meching here. Why exactly would it be implausible for victims to receive compensation in the presence of this model? 1, because they lose the only bargaining chip they have against the firms. They say, I will go to the firms and call you out unless you pay me. That is when they get compensation. They never told us why they could or have any incentive on the part of firms to pay these people for compensation. But secondly, things like class action lawsuits and court cases require more than individual compensation. If anything, one thing we learned from round 9 at Wells is you often require a collective action problem in the status quo, where people can't file court cases begin to take up compensation but don't pursue legal processes that force structural changes in a way we actually have regulations concerning AI robots. You only have on our side when it can't settle it individually, but have to create massive political and public outcry to get more accuracy overall. This saves many future generations of individuals. That's the impact that CG was looking for. The third note thing about victims here is that things like your testimony, sharing your lived experiences, talking to people about your suffering under a medical AI robot is far less likely to happen when you silence them and hush them up. We think it is fundamentally good that they can talk about experiences because A, that increases buy-in to the medical system, but B, that also makes them more confident in the medical system in the long run as individuals. And for all of these reasons, I'm so proud to oppose today. Thank you.
I thank member of opposition. Now I invite Government Whip. Here.
I think there are two parts to this debate. Firstly, whether under these cases, the informal right can be satisfied, and secondly, is in which way we can better to promote the development of AI medical robots and better and benefit people in the long term, not in the long term. But before that, just two rebuttals to previously. I think
Firstly, they mentioned by release the information of the failures or some also and also like the information of the AI medical robots, it can improve the AI robots quality. So we think like when the operation functioned by the AI robots, there always going to be a research a worker in the research clinic that always observe this operation. So when he or she sees that this treatment has failed, they already know like something like they need to development and or more research they need to add to this robot to these AI robots to somehow like improve the accuracy to cure the diseases. So we see So in our paradigm, those improvement of AI robot quality can also be a trait. However, by releasing information, it will always like cause very irreversible horror in the society and also like will hamper the development of AI. I will clarify it in my next comparatives. And secondly, they're talking about like because probably maybe in the long term after society, the AI medical robots will dominate the whole world because like maybe some very big companies will pay a lot of money and advertisement and somehow like the patients will somehow be coercive to only opt into the AI robots treatment. However, we see like when you're faced with two choices, even if like they're always like today's like always advertising like maybe the luxury is very good and we always bring your beauty. However, like based on our own choices, our own maybe the capacity, I can only like maybe buy zero to make my beauty. So it's the similar cases when I faced with the choice of I choose the AI robots or I choose the human doctors to give the operation on me. But so come to my comparatives. Why we think the informed right under these cases can be sacrificed? Because we think it is more important to prioritize people's life. It's like human life in under these cases. We see under the context my partner already told you. People already feel very there's already like existing a panic and also like fear towards the AI, not only limited to the AI medical robots, and also this fear mostly created by human being itself, by fiction, and also like based on their imaginary. And this data and this imaginary hasn't been proved by the science. However, under these cases, the accuracy or the effectiveness of the AI medical robots has been proved that they can function well, much better than human beings. So we see that the main hamper of the current development of AI is the resistance and also the negative opinions from the society that hamper and block the development of AI. So under this case, when we consider the human life, especially in the long term, maybe 10 years later, we think we can sacrifice some informed right of some people. My partner exclusively telling you why we think it's okay, because when you are faced with an operation, the very specific data or the percentage of risk is very big to another people. So to me, when I get sick and I need to receive a treatment, only two things that are in front of me, that is 100%. I will be sound and safe, and also like or 0%. Maybe I could be dead. So we think like not all people have the enough knowledge to understand what's going on. So so because of the education received or the culture received, so it's the human nature that we cannot on the most cases we cannot foresee the long-term benefits maybe will happen 10 years later, because maybe if we support the development of AI medical robots, maybe we can decrease the casualty ratio in the casualty later step by step. Maybe 10 years later, the casualty of the AI medical robots will be decreased to 0.1 percentage. However, currently the nature of human beings is that we cannot foresee. Most of us cannot foresee the long-term benefits maybe happen 10 years later, and also probably at that time is irrelevant to me. So under these cases, we emphasis on the current current situation, like maybe if we know the AI medical robots will cause some casualty or will fail to function well in operation. So I will always like say no to this to those things. So we think the resistance of this AI medical robots will always block and cause the capital loss or the human resources loss to further develop the AI medical robots. So no. So also like the engage with the OO, they tell us like they tell us that if we conceal those information like that, like the human doctors will have no incentive to improve themselves. But we see the incentive will always standing because we are the human being. We want to a better life, also like to prolong our life. So we think the incentive also happen in our two paradigms. However, that we think in which paradigm will bring more benefits is that from our side, we maybe sacrifice some income, right? However, we can save more people's life in the long term and also ensure that you will get a very well treatment in some very serious illness. Also, like they all talking about like because we need to allow people to choose what kind of life and what kind of treatment they receive. Firstly, two responses. Firstly, we don't urge you to choose the operation by AI. We will just want you like at this moment to consider something that may not be relevant for you currently, and to make more benefits in the long term. And also like we think the information you receive doesn't really be very important in this issue, but it's how you can integrate this information in a very rational way matters in these cases. Because if you have the stereotypes towards the AI medical robots, it's really unlikely for you to standing by their side and give their financial support to further to improve this technology. So considering the human life, we are to stand by this.
Alright, I thank Government Whip. Now final speaker, Opposition Whip.
I think two questions to properly frame this debate and take the debate for you. Firstly, is life most important? And if so, who defends it to the fullest extent? Secondly, which side is more prepared for a realistic future and is more likely to bring AI into status quo, not just ideas of what will happen later on? What do we hear from opening government on the idea of life? OG's claim is quite simple. They say that life is important, skepticism will harm ability for more patients to go to hospital for AI doctors, therefore life is damaged. What we hear from OO in response is for them to tell us, well, actually things like information, things like right, things like choices are more important. But here's what we think the limitation of this debate is. There's a lack of weighing of the importance of life versus the importance of rights, which means that at best probably it's a deadlock. One side claiming that it's important for people to live, one side claiming that it's important for people to have the right to choose whether they want to live or not. But if we take OG at their best case, and being charitable here, then okay, on some level, I think all teams do recognize that saving lives is some level of priority. And here's where CO enters this debate, and here's why OG loses out because of the lack of weighing in OG. All OG does to tell us is that currently in the status quo, we're going to save more lives compared to long-term, who is going to improve technologies, that more net benefit of lives are saved. The problem with OG case is that they're only comparing to a counterfactual of status quo, where there are no AI, compared to a status quo where at least AI saves more lives. What we do on CO is to tell you, and this is a more correct counterfactual, that in the new status quo created where we start to doubt these AI, we're more likely to have counter mechanisms to improve AI, where we're going to have more scrutiny. Why is this the case, and what did we say from CO? We said firstly that there's more current impacts, and that probably that there's going to be more skepticism, that there's going to be a conspiracy theory at large if you're unwilling to inform the public at all about these situations. I'm going to talk about in my second argument why they can't just pretend to fiat this, why this absolutely had to be meched out. But secondly, we also told you why long-term that open knowledge is the exact thing and skepticism is what leads to more calm, knowledgeable-based investment and greater financial assessment of risk, which is precisely what leads to more investment in these sectors. Do not be fooled by the fact that O said investment is good or O said innovation is good. Insofar as they said this, they said that you want to pressure engineers to have better systems. What we uniquely told you from CO is exactly why those engineers are hired in the first place and why they feel pressure to innovate in the first place. Why is this the case? I think my partners uniquely told you in their speech that firstly, the financial incentives to improve only exist when there's visible backlash. That there are things like cartels, and we're the only team who nuanced to you why exactly it is so important for this visibility to exist. But secondly, we told you how financial firms work. Firms don't work that they invest because they believe that everyone will keep this secret that is obviously unable to keep. Firms rely on a risk analysis mechanism in which they're able to say, look, there's going to be X amount of profit. We can calculate that probably X percent of the time it's going to be revealed that there's failure. There's going to be public outcry that causes Y percent amount of losses. But all of these things are calculatable by firms, and that's precisely the reason why they're willing to enter these areas. They're only willing to invest money, and they're only accountable to their stockholders because there's going to be public information about what the risk analysis is. On their side of the house, it's impossible to know risk because they hide all information, and now all firms have to be scared about the fact that someday there's going to be outcry, that there's possibility of backlash happening, which is precisely what drives firms away from investing in these areas in the first place. I think insofar as they're able to respond to this argument made by a member, it's only applicable that when firms calculate that risk is greater than potential profits, right? But I think we've already dealt with this in our extension. This was never responded to by the CG. We told you uniquely from our side that oftentimes these firms can pay for advertising to influence social narratives. That big pharma is precisely why we're doing lots of the medical things that we're doing in status quo. Even though opiates probably aren't always the best thing for people, we're still selling these kind of things because we're able to push forward these narratives. But secondly, we also say things like that people who control media tend to be people in power. People are uniquely able to have investment power, and many of these people have links to AI, or links to tech companies or pharma companies in status quo, which is why they're also likely to try to push for narratives that say, look, AI had these problems, but here are the reasons why there are still substantial benefits. But finally, we told you why AI, if substantially better, is going to be a reason why there's going to be investment and more development of this field. The only response we get from any team in this debate is for CG to tell us, well, people are irrational, that even if you tell them, people won't invest. But I don't think it matters so much whether people are irrational, insofar as that firms are rational when they know exactly what the risk is, and when they're able to calculate the percentage of what is going to happen. I don't think CG is important to say patients are going to be afraid to go to the hospital. Not only do we control media narratives, I think firms are very rational about the decisions we make. I think it's very likely that we will have more financial incentives to improve. Why ultimately is this a winning clash for CO? I think we're the unique team in this debate who is able to tell you not just the nuances of why this will happen, but also we're able to compare directly with any gov team who says life is important. Because they only think life is important in short term, as long as we can get at least some more people to the hospital. We think that even if AI is good, we see possibility of development. That is why we're willing to have, at least worst case, lose some life, as long as it means that we're able to create incentive structures to push for betterment of this AI technology in the first place. Yes?
The context of this debate isn't a world in which the AI technologies are already widely implemented. It's a world in which it hasn't yet been implemented due to that skepticism. Explain how you get the benefits of that implementation.
I think this is just false, but even if we were talking about this, I still think there's reason for this AI technology to develop before being implemented, because the things about risk still apply, that POI is not important. Second clash, therefore, who is more prepared about the realistic situation? I think we dealt very charitably with the best case of OG, where we say life is very important, therefore how do we best guarantee life? But let's talk about realistically what's going to happen. Because oftentimes this information is going to come out, or it's very likely to come out. Because if a hospital that's famous for AI for 2 years has lots of accidents, but apparently there are no accidents, then it's going to be highly suspicious. And I don't think they can just fiat that they can hide all the information. It's probably common sense that some of these accidents are going to be attributed to AI. But it doesn't even doesn't matter if the government can have a blanket no talking on all of this. The problem is that if firms are still afraid that the government might fail, that there will be public outcry, because conspiracy theories don't really need facts in order to drive forward these narratives of science being terrible, that means firms are less likely to trust the fact that this is a viable technology mechanism. All they do is preserve technology insofar as it is in status quo, but in the same breath, we've already established you why that technology is likely to digress, why there will be no improvement. In the end of this day, I think AI is great, but the problem is you can't have what you have in status quo and pretend that it's going to be the best forever. There must be mechanisms for change. We give it to you uniquely on steel. Thank you.
Perhaps all teams may cross the floor, shake hands, and wait outside.